right, Harry? You're right.
Yeah.
Do you want a tissue?
No, the tears have dried up now.
It didn't end up at the Emirates, by the way, just to clarify.
But there was technically a trophy there, just in case.
Oh, yeah.
So can you say that it didn't end up at the Emirates?
Yes, because it was at the Etihad. And I saw that, actually. I saw didn't they have a big old Arsenal champions arch that never got used?
There was a lot made of that, but they had to prepare.
Yeah.
They had to prepare.
Did they?
Protocol.
Come on.
Of course they did.
West Ham are always going to fold, weren't they?
Yeah.
Listen, it was a good season, wasn't it? Let's be fair here. No trophies, but actually, quarterfinals of the Champions League, very good. But it's the league season, I think, as well. Like Arteta even said in that piece there, more wins, I think, than any other season. And you're up against perfection, aren't you, in Manchester City? But overall, how are you summing up this season out of 10?
I'm going to give it an 8. I don't think you can give it more than an 8 when you don't win anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where it falls down a little bit is probably in the cup competitions. I felt like Arsenal should have gone further in the Champions League. I know it was Bayern Munich. I know they're a club steeped in European history, but I don't think this is a great Bayern Munich side. And I really do feel like Arsenal missed the trick a little bit there in terms of progressing there. I felt like that was a point in the season where Arsenal looked extremely tired.
Yeah.
The 2 Bayern games and the Villa game in between, which is ultimately a result that you could argue cost them the title. They managed to find a second wind after that, to be fair to them, but that was a really critical period. Didn't go very far in the FA Cup, but they were drawn at home to Liverpool in the third round. And in the Carabao Cup, they went out.
That was a bizarre game as well. They played
really
well and just didn't win,
knocked out of the League Cup by West Ham away. Not an easy game, given the circumstances, given that you were going to rest players, and obviously West Ham, to them, it meant more, shall we say. But I think 8 out of 10 is about fair. I think it's one of those, Ollie, where in the last few days I felt really downbeat and dejected, but I know that in a month's time, as we start to look forward to the new season and we're talking about transfers, I'm going to feel really, really excited because, as Mikel Arteta said, it is more than progress.
I think you should be excited. Like you've just said, you've only just missed out on the league title. And to be pretty cynical, we've heard from Pep Guardiola, it might be his last season next season. Klopp's gone. I'd be very, very excited if I was an Arsenal fan right now, given where they are as a club and given the way they are challenging in the league. I'm really actually quite surprised to hear that you're disappointed with the season because of the cup competitions, because actually looking at it as an Arsenal fan, I know you didn't get there, but the way you pushed Manchester City in the league, it was even further than last season. And actually, it felt like you'd built on last season, especially mentally as well. I feel like, there was so much talk about Man City will go on a run, they'll do this, and they did because we knew that was going to happen. But you've got to give Arsenal credit for doing that as well. You mentioned, I know they lost that Villa game, but actually look at their 2024. Ridiculous. A ridiculous run of results. And actually, if I was an Arsenal fan, yes, I'd be downbeat, I'd be a bit dejected. But actually, heading into next season, I'll be very confident indeed, especially if you can bring some bodies in the door. We'll come on to that in just a second. But just on the title, you mentioned that Villa game, but where for you do you think that the title was actually lost?
I think it was actually lost when you go back to December and Arsenal lost back-to-back games against West Ham and Fulham. You can barely afford to lose a game in this division, especially when you're up against Manchester City, let alone back-to-back games. And if you don't lose those games back-to-back, then you can afford the one slip-up that we had in 2024. You mentioned the form since the turn of the year. They played 18 games in the Premier League in 2024. They won 16 of them, drew 1 at Manchester City, which is a very respectable result, and, of course, lost that 1 game against Aston Villa. The amount of goals they scored, the clean sheets they kept, they were almost flawless in that second part of the season. And the fact that they were still in contention going into the second part of the season, given all the talk at the start of the campaign, he's messed it up by bringing Raya in. He's messed it up by bringing Havertz in. No Thomas Partey, Jurriën Timber, who was supposed to finish off our defence, is out.
And they've all come good. They've
Absolutely.
all come good. And that, as I say, is incredibly exciting. So you didn't lose it at St James's Park, just to check, because that was another game. Just to check. It wasn't.
We were denied a point at St James's Park due to some disgraceful officiating. However, that point wouldn't have been enough to make us champions. Anyway.
Do you know what? I completely agree with you that it was that little spell over Christmas, wasn't it, where they just lost their way a bit, and then it was that Bayern and Villa week. And you're right, they just looked, and they didn't throughout pretty much the rest of the entire season, they just looked sapped of energy completely.
It was sad as well because, like, sometimes fortune comes into these things, right? But Manchester City had their 2 ties against Real Madrid, and who did they play in between? Luton Town. And they were able to make wholesale changes. They still got eliminated from the Champions League, but they were able to make changes. Arsenal couldn't make changes against Villa. Mikel Arteta tried to be fair to him. He made a couple of tweaks. I think he brought Zinchenko back in the side. He definitely dropped Kai Havertz back into that midfield area.
Ironically, it was kind of bringing Zinchenko back in that cost Arsenal in the end, because that's where Villa kind of targeted Arsenal, if I remember rightly, on that occasion as well. You also brought up the draw against Man City, which you said was a good result.
Fantastic result.
Now Rodri came out and said, actually, we knew Arsenal weren't going to win it because they didn't try and beat us at the Etihad, and they should have done. If they want to be title winners, they've got to try and win those kind of games. Did that wind you up?
What a load of nonsense.
Is it?
What a load of nonsense. What a load of absolute nonsense. If he's pretending that back in March they were convinced they were going to win the league and that Arsenal had no choice, he's a liar. Because Arsenal had Manchester City in a situation this year. There's no doubt about that. When they went to Spurs...
But in a way, doesn't that prove his point? Because in that game, Arsenal were, it was a weird game. They massively limited Man City. You had that chance where Trossard went through, didn't quite play the right ball. But does Rodri actually have a point that they were there for the taking in that game and Arsenal should have?
No, not at all. Because if we're talking about this Manchester City side being one of the greatest ever, how is it a disgrace to take 4 points off them? If Arsenal had lost the home game or only got a draw in the home game, and then people were critical of them for not trying to win the away game, and I'm not saying they didn't try to win it, but not over-exerting themselves and putting themselves in a position where they could be caught on the break or whatever. If the first game hadn't gone the way it did, I'd completely understand it. But if you take 4 points off of Manchester City and you take 4 points off of Liverpool, it's not the games between your fellow title contenders where you've lost the league. It's elsewhere. And when City went to Spurs that night, they were extremely fortunate that it was Spurs and that the atmosphere was the way that it was. Manchester City were not going into that Spurs game, I'm telling you, thinking this is done, this is wrapped up. Their celebrations at the end of the game indicated that they knew that was when they got over the finish line.
So is it pure mind games then?
Absolutely.
It's pretty good, to be fair.
It's pretty good.
It would, if you're an Arsenal player, that is going to wind you right up,
100%.
isn't it?
Mikel Arteta's team talk next season is done for him.
Yeah, very, very true. In terms of next season, where do you think... I mean, this is a tough question, by the way. Where can Arsenal strengthen their squad, do you think?
I think there's a couple of areas. I think that central midfield is something that needs to be looked at because the difference when Thomas Partey returned was massive.
Yeah.
But equally, I think in the last couple of games, you saw that he's not really capable at the moment of stringing a run of games together and being at the right physical condition. When he is at the right physical condition, we know what he's got to his game. We know how good he can be. But I would worry if I was Arsenal that he could carry that.
Who do you want to see come in then, Harry? Is this you trying to wind me up? Because I know who you're going to say.
I'm not going to say Bruno Guimaraes, actually.
Oh, you're not? Oh, right.
No, I think I'd rather go for Ederson of Atalanta.
Very good player.
And I think Bruno Guimaraes is a good player, but I just think Ederson would be attainable at a much more reasonable price because of where he'd be coming from. He's in a Premier League rival, he's in a club with the wealth that Newcastle have. So I think that's probably a more realistic...
Well, it's a good point because Bruno Guimaraes' release clause is 100 million. And actually, I think there's something to do with the fact that maybe expires at the end of June as well. So they have to get the business done early as well. So you're saying that maybe a bit of a cheaper option, but a very good player. I mean, we saw that last night in the Europa League final. You think that would be more sensible for Arsenal to do? Yeah,
I think with Ederson as well, because he can play, and Bruno Guimaraes, I suppose, can do this as well, but because he can play as a 6 and an 8.
Right, Bruno can do the same. Yeah.
I think that makes him a really good fit. Declan Rice has been immense this season. Jorginho's been given a short-term contract extension, so there's no real need to replace him at the moment. But Thomas Partey is the one I've got big questions about. Can he do it? Is there a world in which Mikel Arteta starts to use Zinchenko as a midfielder? Because he's fallen out of favour at left-back, but still has a lot to offer technically. I wonder. I think midfield is the priority area for me. And
that's interesting because there is so much talk, isn't there, about when are Arsenal going to get a new striker? But you've actually never banged that drum. You've always said that it's other areas of the pitch that are more exciting. But what do you make of it? If there are Arsenal fans out there going, "Come on, Harry, we need another forward. We need to sort this situation out."
I think you can make a case that we should go out and bring in another forward, and I think we will. I think that Eddie Nketiah is probably going to move on this summer. I'm not sure what you'd get for him. I think Reece Nelson's going to go. So those are two forward players that you'd probably need to replace. I think there are question marks about Gabriel Jesus' fitness going forward. The knee issue
didn't have the best end to the season, did it?
No, but he's got this ongoing knee problem. You know, he's had to go under the knife on a couple of occasions this season to rectify issues that were sort of hangovers from the major knee injury that he had and the operation that he had. And so I don't think he's ever been fit. I think Martinelli's form dropped off this season quite dramatically. Not suggesting that either of him or Jesus should go, by the way. But I think there's a case to say you go out and get another forward. What I would say is the fact that Arsenal scored 91 goals in the Premier League, Kai Havertz contributed, Saka did, Trossard did.
Do you need a striker?
Maybe we don't need a £100 million plus striker. Maybe we just need someone who's an out-and-out striker to the value of 40, 50, 60 million pounds that can come in and out and be an alternative to what we currently have. But if spending on a striker is going to stop you regenerating the midfield, then I wouldn't do it. I think that the midfield is a bigger priority.
Yeah, so just to clarify, you don't need Alexander Isak. You're saying that?
Oh, Alexander Isak, we absolutely do need him, but at £90 million and not a penny more.
Yeah, I don't think you're getting him, mate. I don't think you're getting him for that.
Newcastle have been linked with a couple of forwards today, just saying.
Yeah, no, stop it, Harry. Stop it.
Just saying, just throwing it out there.
You are being Rodri of this show, you know. You are just winding me up so much.
You brought him up.
Just very quickly, just before we go to the break, whilst Pep Guardiola is at Manchester City, can Arsenal win the league?
They can. It's going to be incredibly difficult, though. But I think Arsenal have made big strides in the last couple of years to get closer and closer to Manchester City, and bar for a couple of really fine margins, Arsenal could have done it this year.
It's shades of Liverpool, isn't it, under Klopp, and they finally had that season where actually they won it at Cantor, and we might see that happen, but you never know really. But like I said before, I would be very excited if I was an Arsenal fan right now. Really hope they're not getting Bruno or Isak, but we'll have to see this summer.
We'll have them both.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.